欢迎各位回到论坛的现场 ，Welcome back, everyone。紧接着是今天的第一场座谈，2025年股东会前瞻，亚洲与台湾。Coming up next is our first panel discussion of the day, 2025 Proxy Season Outlook, Asia and Taiwan。现在让我们邀请到本场座谈的主持人。 富达国际亚洲永续投资业务总监 Miss Flora Wang， 欢迎。Now please join me in welcoming to the stage our moderator Miss Flora Wang, Head of Stewardship Asia and Portfolio Advisor at Fidelity International， 以及我们的与谈人 panelist Philip Fu, Vice President of APAC Research and Engagement at Glass Lewis. Glenn McGuire, Head of Asia ex-Japan Research at ISS Stock. Edward Sun, Head of Markets and Lending Solutions for APAC, Middle East and Africa at S&P Global. Francis Wang, Senior Associate at Sodali and Company. 欢迎。我们有请主持人和与谈人可以就座，谢谢。Please have a seat. Please have a seat. 为了欢迎我们远道而来的讲者，主办单位特别准备了台湾的特色美食珍珠奶茶，提供给与会的国外贵宾品尝，展现台湾浓浓的人情味，欢迎外宾享用。To welcome our distinguished speakers who have traveled far to Taipei, the host TDCC has specially prepared Taiwan iconic drink, bubble milk tea, showcasing a strong sense of hospitality. We invite our distinguished speakers and foreign guests to enjoy it. 我们再一次欢迎远道而来的讲者及贵宾。接下来将时间交给座谈主持人。Now I'd like to give the floor to the moderator. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Thanks very much for the introduction. Good morning, everyone. My name is Flora. I lead the stewardship and research team at Fidelity International for Asia Pacific. I'm based in Hong Kong. I'm very glad to be in Taiwan. It's always nice to be in Taiwan. So thanks again to TDCC for inviting me. To begin, I would like to actually apologize for my funny voice. I'm still recovering from a really sore throat. My voice generally doesn't sound this sexy, unfortunately. I would also like to apologize in advance. I might need to take a mint during the panel to stop myself from coughing. But good news is you don't need to hear as much from me because we've got a wonderful panel of experts who will be doing most of the sharing. So let's get started. I think I'd like to first invite each of you to briefly introduce yourself. Obviously you're work focused, but also, the first thing you think of when you think of Taiwan, actually, just to, make it a little bit more personal. I would like to actually start with Frances, please. Ladies first.
Great. Thank you, Flora, and thank you, TDCC, for inviting me for being here this morning. I'm very glad to see everyone. So I'm Frances. I am a senior associate at Sodali & Co. We help companies to improve their corporate governance practices, and I'm very glad to be here in Taipei. And the fact that the TDCC has prepared us some bubble tea to start the first panel this morning makes me feel very relaxing, and it's a great hospitality here. Yeah.
The first thing you think of when you think of Taiwan is bubble tea now?
Yeah, it's very classic.
Yeah. Great. All right, Edward, over to you.
Thank you, Flora, and thank you as well to the TDCC and TWSC for hosting such a wonderful event here in Taiwan. My name is Edward Sun. I'm the head of Markets and Lending Solutions for S&P Global Market Intelligence. Most of you may know S&P for either the index business that we have or the fixed income business where we rate many of the bonds out there in the market. I represent the market intelligence business, which is more of the data analytics and workflow solutions that we provide to financial capital market solutions as well as to issuers out there in the market. We work very closely with many of the Taiwan listed issuers here in this market, helping them around understanding what's happening in their shareholder base, helping them around some of the governance advisory and solicitation of votes around shareholder meetings, but increasingly as well, obviously, advising them around sustainability practices as well. So very pleased to be here today with a panel of experts over here. First thing I think about when coming to Taiwan is night markets. I love the night markets, love the food. I can't say I'm a big fan of chou tofu, but you know, I'm getting there, so yeah.
Good efforts. All right, Glenn.
Thank you very much, Flora, and good morning, everyone. My name is Glenn Maguire, and I'm the head of benchmark research for Asia ex-Japan at ISS Stocks. My background is I have been a researcher in capital markets across Asia, probably for the past 25 years, based in Hong Kong, Singapore, and now Sydney. The first thing I think of when I think of Taiwan is Din Tai Fung, and that reflects my belief in globalization and my passion for food.
That's a good one. Yeah, I'm a big fan of Din Tai Fung as well. But I'm actually going to Yilan. I heard there are like two famous local xiaolongbao places in Yilan. One is called Zhengchang, the other one's called Zhenghao. So not sure how to pick, but you know, just anecdote. Please, Phil, over to you.
Thank you, and thank you to TDCC for hosting and having me here today. This is my first time in Taiwan, and the boba was on the bucket list, so thank you very much for facilitating. I am the Vice President of Asia Pac Research for Glass Lewis. That includes all markets from Australia to Japan and obviously Taiwan as well. In a prior life, I was a forensic accountant, so I've come up through the accounting track, starting off as an auditor in New Zealand many years ago. And with that, we like to bring a focus on financials in our proxy voting research as well as the ESG performance.
What's the first thing you think of when thinking about Taiwan?
Well, some of them were taken earlier in the panel, but between boba, night markets, and semiconductors, I think that's what pops into my mind.
That's fair. Big range, but fair. Okay, well, let's get to the topics of the panel. Edward, I'd like to start with you. Given your, I guess, work with data a lot, I'm sure, and I think you've been working with issuers in Taiwan for many, many years. What are some of the observations in terms of the shareholder mix in Taiwan? Are you seeing any kind of trend in terms of perhaps rising institutional shareholder in the shareholder mix? Anything that you find interesting, please share with us.
Yeah, no, that's a great question and great way to start off the panel here today as well. So we analyze institutional money flows around the world, and we can come down to country level or sector level if we wanted to as well. Specifically for Taiwan, I think looking back over the last 10 years, so from 2024 back to 2014, couple of observations I want to make. So two key ones I want to make. One is around foreign ownership. I think Taiwan companies like to focus a lot on FINIs and the foreign institutional ownership. I like to say that I think in terms of amount of money invested in the market, it's probably quadrupled, if not gone to about 5 times the amount over the last 10 years of money that's invested into the Taiwan market. In terms of the actual mix between foreign institutions and domestic institutions, it's probably largely remained constant at roughly about 2/3 of that money is foreign money and about 1/3 of that is domestic money. Now, we had a presentation earlier on from Amar speaking about obviously the differences between some of the foreign institutions and their engagement levels versus domestic. I mean, both of them are up there at those levels. But I think one of the important things about foreign investors is obviously, firstly, they're geographically quite far from Taiwan. So the level of engagement that you may need to have with those investors is quite significant. And secondly, because they represent some 2/3 of the investment into the market, they actually play quite a significant role in the driving of the changes that we see in the market, as well as the participation in ESG initiatives and in proxy voting initiatives as well. So, that's one of the observations we want to make, is the fact that foreign investors continue to play a very big part in this market, and they will continue to grow in investment in this market as well. Why that might be the case? I mean, some might say it's because of the great work that Taiwan Stock Exchange and TDCC have done around helping Taiwan companies get out there and be more in the market so that people understand and know who they are. But as well as that, I think we've seen a big growth in the market as well of things like ETFs in the Taiwan market as well, which has grown quite significantly over the last couple of years. The other data point I think that's interesting to look at is typically we look at what the active and passive mix of investors looks like as well. Now, in 2014, when we looked into the market, we saw that active investors represented some 71% of the funds that were invested into the Taiwan market. Passives were about 29%. In 2024, the last data point that I have here, about 56% of the money is active, 44% of that money is passive. So the amount of passive money that's continued to grow and invest in the market, again, has grown quite significantly.
Is that just BlackRock?
It's a huge amount. And again, probably driven a lot by sort of the growth in the ETF market that we've seen in the Taiwan market as well. Now, why is that significant? And I think that's something we can speak about as well from the other panelists out here. Passive investors typically will have a much broader mandate and ability to invest in a much broader range of the market compared to active managers. Now, active managers usually have a certain limitation, whether it's human resources or capability to invest in the deep part of the market. Tracking the index obviously gives them a much deeper exposure. So many more companies in Taiwan potentially are being invested by passive managers and by default also foreign investors today as a result of that growth. Secondly, I think passive investors traditionally have been probably a bigger driving force in the whole ESG debate and also in the engagement side of things as well. Probably driven through market dynamics, the fact that you can't really sell out an investment if you didn't like it meant that you had to do something to engage with the company in order to ensure that your investments were being secured and that there was a sustainable future to what it is that you were investing. The third part to it, which I think is relevant for all the corporates out here, is you will engage with your active managers on a regular basis, whether it's around earnings calls, your AGMs, roadshows, conferences, etc. But you typically wouldn't engage with your passive fund managers. But these passive fund managers represent some 44% of the register today. So it's a huge amount of money that's being invested through the passive managers. So they are the ones that need to be engaged with. And they have a slightly different way of engaging with you. Their agenda for engaging you will be slightly different. Their understanding of who you are will also be very different as compared to an active manager as well. So that's something of the things that for you to think about is how do you engage with that segment of the market that typically you wouldn't engage in? And that segment of the market, together with your foreign institutional shareholders, is continuing to grow quite a fair bit. And so that's really a focus that potentially all of you have to think about, that as Taiwan continues to become much more international, much more open to global investors, is what you need to be doing in order to meet the requirements and the requests by these foreign investors out there.
Well, no, I think, having worked at BlackRock and now with Fidelity, I can attest to your comment that the way a passive asset manager engages with a company is actually very different from active investors. So I think those are definitely very interesting kind of points to note for issuers wanting to reach out your vast shareholder base, comprising of quite different investor types. Glenn, do you want to come in to have some comments here?
Edward's point on the mix of foreign, domestic, active and passive investors really is important for this upcoming proxy season. And our first two keynote speakers this morning talked a lot about the uncertainty of the moment, which is obviously reflecting the changes in trade and tariff policy and how that is going to impact decisions. But that uncertainty transmits directly into boardroom decisions in a number of ways. Investment is likely to be delayed, operating expenditure likely to be paused, acquisitions paused. So the amount of capital which is withheld on balance sheet is likely to rise in an environment like this. On the other hand, given the uncertainty created in markets, investors, particularly the active ones, are likely to be looking for more robust justifications for why that capital is being held. They're likely to be more discerning in the justifications that they're looking for that and the longer-term allocation strategies around that. So this particular moment, I think, looking at the investor and the issuer side of the market does really set the scene for where we perhaps could see more engagement coming from those investors and their expectations of issuers in this season.
Well, absolutely. I think Amar mentioned in his presentation that we are seeing kind of rising shareholder activism in Asia, the value-up program in Japan, and now career is trying to kind of replicate that with a different level of success or failure. And I think when it comes to Taiwan, we've been observing shareholder activism on the rise as well, but in a slightly different way. I would say we see a lot more local proxy contexts that doesn't necessarily involve foreign investors, and that can get quite complicated at times as well, which is why I feel quite fortunate that we have Frances here with us today. She's been working very closely with many issuers in Taiwan, you know, helping them to navigate a situation like a proxy context here. So Frances, would you like to share some of your kind of observations or do's and don'ts for issuers here in a situation like that?
Yeah, thank you, Flora. Shareholder activism in Taiwan, during my tenure before at both ISS and GL, I've covered a few cases on shareholder activism in Taiwan, including the recent Taixing and Shinkong merger, as well as the bank, Changhua Bank and MOF, the merger case as well. From my observation, I think I want to divide the timeline into before and after. I just bring attention to our proxy advisors here, before and after the proxy research paper issuance. So there's 3 points I want to talk about where I think companies can improve their practices. First, and I will elaborate later. And first one is being the enhancement of their information disclosure. And the second one will be the engagement with your investors as well as the proxy advisors. And third one will be your response program after what if proxy advisors has issued adverse recommendations on your transaction, and what you to do now? What to do now? Yeah. So back to my first point, the information disclosure. So oftentimes, when our companies has been targeted for a contested elections, or there will be, or when there are shareholder proposals on the dividend allocations, in cases like that, companies tend to not having enough. That's what my observation is. Company might not be putting their rationales like very explicitly in their meeting handbooks. I think what we are looking for is a more rebuttal explanation in companies' information disclosure handbook, addressing the reasons. So why, if this proposal is proposed by shareholders, why it is not supported by the board, and the reason behind that. And as well as not only in contested elections and shareholder proposals on dividends, even during like for mergers and acquisition transactions, oftentimes we see companies giving rationales really based on, oh, this is compliant, like I am doing this because I'm complying with government policies, etc., but without specifically mentioning how your proposed transaction is going to enhance shareholder value and how it is benefiting your shareholders. So this is what I think companies can improve in their information disclosure. And second one is your engagement. Your engagement with proxy advisors and your investors. So as companies, so do you really know well of who your investors are? So do you know who your top investors are? And do you know who your investors are subscribing to? Are they subscribing to GL, ISS, or other like domestic proxy advisors? And what your investors' voting policies are? And how many voting powers do your investors have? I think companies would be benefiting from doing a regular shareholder ID check by really get to know your investors. And at the same time, when you propose a transaction, do you know what the market reaction will be? And do you know how would the proxy advisor would vote on would recommend on your proposed transaction. I think these are really questions to have in the back of your head as companies. And so with this information on your hand, you will be ready to engage with proxy advisors and investors. And really, like, how do you prepare for your engagement? In what narratives are you going to talk about? That's something to keep in mind for engagements. And third point I want to address is your response. So oftentimes if your proposed transaction is not being supported by the proxy advisors, and what do you do now? But I think this is a good opportunity after the proxy advisors' papers, and you should be able to actively engage with your investors. Now you really need to think about how to win back the shareholder votes by actively creating engagement and communication with your investors. Yeah.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Francis. Well, I guess this is a good kind of opportunity to bring in the proxy advisors in terms of how issuers can better engage them, especially given the percentage of passive investors is now at 44% compared to 20-something back in 2014. And passive investors, I guess, sometimes do refer to the proxy advisors' recommendations quite heavily. So, they have become, in a way, even more influential in terms of how investors actually vote at the shareholder meeting. So can I bring you in, Phil and Glenn, now to talk about how you engage with issuers and how do you kind of advise issuers to come to you when they want to discuss something and ultimately get your support? Phil, maybe I'll start with you.
Yeah, sure. And I want to start off that engagement in Taiwan, it does not seem to be a common practice. Compared across the region, Glass Lewis, in the Asia Pacific has possibly around the 800 mark of engagements with issuers throughout a year. The number of those with Taiwan entities is probably around a dozen. We really only get engagement with a very small handful of the largest issuers. And would love to change that. So here's my plea that we do.
Do we have your email address somewhere?
we can put it up. It's through the website. We've got a portal to engage. But there's a few things that I want to dig into on that around how we engage, and I believe engaging with ICS is a little different. You'll be aware that we'll have a team of between a permanent team of 6 analysts covering Taiwan, and we've got a roving team, support team of about 18 that will join them for proxy season. And during that proxy season, a 6 or 7 week long period, they're going to be producing around 1,200 reports. So season is busy. All issuers like to have their AGMs at the same time. And what I want to do is encourage the room on engagement is that you should be thinking about engagement throughout the year, well in advance of your AGM, to have those conversations at a time that we, Glass Lewis, but also I think I can speak generally for the investment community here, that passive investors will have capacity to engage with you just because of that volume flow. So engage frequently and engage early is my suggestion. As Francis said, it's quite unusual or quite difficult to put out a piece of proxy advice, given that on the basis of very limited disclosure, to find in the final days pre an AGM, the disclosure all of a sudden becomes a moving target, increasing. And while I in a sense, like, fantastic result that additional disclosure is forthcoming, it's really not the preferred way for an orderly voting process amongst the institutional investor community. So that again is something that could be avoided with engagements earlier in the year. I'll pause there for Glenn.
Thanks, Philip. Yes, basically, Francis's advice on sort of principles for engaging in a proxy contest and Philip's descriptions, really do apply, particularly in a market like Taiwan, where there's sort of quite a fragmented shareholder base. I think our approach is more contextual and situational rather than prescriptive, which is why we value one-on-one engagement in terms of being able to work with you through these matters. But the key points that I would suggest are, one, engage early. As Philip mentioned, when we're in season, the sheer volume of reports that we're producing doesn't give us time to really go into the nuance that is necessary to often consider some of the changes or the information that's been put forward. Two, be transparent, in terms of board, director qualifications, matrix of skills, etc., rationale behind agenda items. That all helps us get on the same page quickly and more efficiently. Prepare the board and senior stakeholders if we do need to engage with them directly. That's an incredibly helpful part of the process in terms of preparing for engagement. And just an overall principle that dialogue is essential to the engagement process, and that dialogue being as sort of clear with all the information available really helps make the engagement process more efficient. And all through the year, we are free for that engagement to occur.
Cool. Well, I guess if I can summarize, right, in terms of how issuers can better talk to your investors, number one, you need to find the right person to speak to. You need to understand your shareholder base, and that's where, companies or folks like Edward could be really, helpful. And then plan early is always a good thing to keep in mind, especially when it comes to proxy voting engagement. Given the concentration of meetings, it never hurts to plan early and start your outreach either to proxy advisors or your investors early. And then, I guess ultimately, you need to have a good story. You need to have the content to communicate with your investors on, right? What is the thing that you're trying to get your investors' support for? And you've got to have a compelling, I guess, rationale behind that. And then you just go there, find the right people, tell your story, and hopefully, you're a setholder. I think that's essentially the kind of gist of it. Now, we've talked so far about how to react to kind of a shareholder activism, or when you're concerned about getting shareholder approvals for something. I want to kind of switch the logic a little bit to think about how investors can preempt a activism situation. And I know, Phil, you have wearing your former forensic accountant hat, and now you have a bigger focus, I guess, company value, shareholder value in your proxy research work as well, as you mentioned earlier. Is there, something you would like to share with the audience in terms of how to prevent your company becoming a target?
Happy to, and I should give kudos to Taiwan in this regard. Taiwan is not particularly low-hanging fruit for activism targets, but perhaps we can learn from our neighbors in South Korea and Japan, where activism has become quite a regular feature. So 10 years or so ago, Japan issuers would be in large conglomerate groups. They typically would pay very low levels of dividends and hoard large amounts of cash on the balance sheet. The idea with that was that they could expand as they chose. They did not have significant regard to shareholder return. My view is that is coming from an insular view of the companies. The Japanese government has, over time, encouraged change on that regard, and Korea similarly. We use the term value up, or Korea coined the term value up, where capital efficiency, the views around the cost of capital and cost of holding capital were really coming to the fore. And as a result, some Japanese entities improved that practice, which gave rise to an opportunity for hedge funds to target laggards in the market where they were not distributing their capital efficiently, or not yielding the returns on their cash balances, or potentially were investing in adjacent businesses that really had nothing to do with their core mandates. And the hedge funds that would do that were really trying to make a return off two key things. One, the capacity for them to galvanize the shareholder base to make a change. And two, that there was, in fact, a change that could be made relatively simply, and that change often around capital allocation, but occasionally around governance. Taiwan is not the lowest hanging fruit for a couple of reasons. One, your first and best defense against becoming an activist target is, of course, having a controlling shareholder, which isn't something that we, as an advocate for minority investors, prefer, but that's the reality. If you have a controlling shareholder, a hedge funds are not going to conclude that they can force you to change. But second, the second best defense is to make sure that you are paying attention to your cost of capital, that you are investing along a strategy that maximizes shareholder returns, that you do have governance, adhere to governance best practices, and there's no opportunity for a value up to occur by a change of your board.
Flora, just quickly want to add to that a couple of things on the activist side of things. Activists are extremely smart people, incredibly smart. However, quite often, the idea of a company in which to go after or attack doesn't come from the activists, but it comes from an investor. And sometimes it can come from that investor that's invested in that company, right? Now, these are investors that are potentially disgruntled. I hold Toyota shares, and I wish that they were doing something a bit better than what they were doing today. However, the management does not want to listen to me. I might drop a couple of ideas out there in the market, it starts to circulate around, an activist picks it up, and they start thinking about it, and then they might actually run a campaign. It is true that quite a number of the activist ideas actually come from investors itself. So one of the defenses that we always talk about in the US market and some of the other markets where we see big activism campaigns, and Asia's a lot bigger now than Europe, as we have seen from Amar, is talk to the investors, right? Try and get more feedback from investors and listen to them, because they will tell you what it is that they're hearing in the market. Activists are not acting on their own. They are sounding out the market. They are talking to people out there. They are getting a lot of ideas as to what is going on out there. Secondly, I think is what we see in terms of activist campaigns that are announced and seen in the market is typically only the tip of the iceberg. There is a lot more underneath that we don't see. And typically some of those ones are the ones where companies maybe have spoken to activists, have done something, and have settled in some shape or form in private that we don't actually see happening out there. The ones that we see at the top of the iceberg typically are the ones that have escalated to the point where they have to go after them, they have to attack these guys, and they have to go out very public and getting out the message out in the press and attacking these people out there in public. I was at the ICGN conference quite recently with some of the folks here in Japan. One of the big activists out there is Oasis Capital, Seth Fisher. If you ever get a chance to meet the guy, he's incredibly passionate about what he does. He doesn't come across as actually quite a bad guy that's trying to break up a company. He actually comes across as a guy that really believes in the products and believes in what the company is trying to do, but just doesn't believe that the company has executed it in the right way. And what he's trying to do and why he's gone public with some of the campaigns is because I keep knocking on the door and I keep asking the company to listen to me, have a meeting with me, and they refuse to meet with me. They refuse to engage. So I have no choice but to make it public, right? So for companies out here, there is the opportunity for you to not get to that stage. And it again comes back to that engagement, right? Speak to your investors, speak to the activists. They will tell you things. And it's up to you whether you decide you want to take on board their feedback or not. But at least keep the door open for that feedback to come through to you.
I think in Asia, at least my observation is that shareholder activism is still very much about capital allocation. It's essentially a debate between investors and the company / controlling shareholders of the company on how best to use the money that's sitting on the balance sheet of the company, right? So I think in most cases, it's kind of a black and white situation. So if you've been approached by your investors a few times on your shareholder return policy, your dividend distribution policy, how you're kind of expanding into businesses that are not necessarily closely related to your core business, then that's kind of a red flag that someone somewhere out there, be it an activist, investor, or whatever, may be thinking along similar lines, and they might have been speaking to your investors already. But if you have a controlling shareholder, you are in a way, quote unquote, protected, but still I think there are other ways for shareholders to try to push for their version of the optimal capital allocation, right? For example, shareholder proposal, right, on capital allocation or dividend distribution to be specific. What we haven't seen as much in Asia in terms of shareholder activism is really shareholder proposals on ENS issues, which is more common in Europe and less so in the US, and definitely even less so these days. We're even seeing somewhat of a backlash against certain ESG issues, I think DEI to be specific, in the US. And on that, I want to actually bring Phil and Glenn, both of you in here, in terms of any key changes you've made to your proxy voting guidelines. I know both of your organizations recently amended your voting policy specifically on DEI. I'm keen to hear a bit more about that, the thinkings behind it, and also how your clients, investors, have reacted to your approach. And then we can talk more broadly, the updates you've made to your proxy voting guidelines, especially when it comes to Taiwan, given we're quickly entering the proxy voting season here. So I'll maybe go to Glenn first this time on your approach to the DEI voting this year for US companies.
Yes, thank you very much. This is an area that has been getting a lot of attention, so I would like to clarify it. ISS did make a pause to the strict application of its DEI policy in one market, the US. And the reason for that was, on the first day of the administration, 3 executive orders were signed that characterized DEI policies as illegal. And those executive orders went on to encourage agencies to spread that notion of illegality into the private sector via their engagements. Now, this comes after a year of where state legislatures had been pursuing ESG activism as market manipulation and coordinated voting. So with that characterization of DEI as illegal, the regulatory and legal risks around our recommendations and our clients' actions upon them immediately changed. So the decision we made regarding our policy was to essentially put 1 degree of separation between us and our clients, to remove the perception that the recommendations we were making on DEI and diversity-based board appointments could be seen as a fulcrum for coordinated voting action. And that is the action that we chose to take in the US. We still provide the full suite of research and data and analysis on all aspects of diversity to all our clients, and we continue to champion in other markets that very foundational principle that over the long run, more diverse boards are more effective boards. But certainly that's something that we're continuing to watch. I think consistency of policies in the US at this stage is certainly not a certainty at this stage, and it's something that we're actively revisiting. And I think the degree of client engagement around this space really does demonstrate just that when we look at forums such as this with topics like how we become an asset management center, it's not just the market mechanics, it's not just the market depth, it's not just the regulatory framework. Diversity, representation, experience, and the mix of skills that diversity brings to a board are absolutely essential, 1, to a company's performance, but 2, to a country's performance as an asset manager.
So Glass Lewis has taken a different approach after considering the executive orders, our US guidelines, and outside of the US, everything remains as it was. But within the US, we have also continued to maintain our diversity policies regarding directors, as well as regarding how we'll consider shareholder proposals. So what that is for Russell 3000 companies, an expectation that there's 30% women on the board, and for Russell 1000 companies, an expectation that there is one, I think the term used in our guidelines is a member from an underrepresented community, but essentially ethnic diversity or LGBTI diversity on the board. So 30% women on board, one ethnic or other minority diversity. And our rationale behind that is simply that Donald Trump's executive orders don't change the underlying principle that we've always believed, that these elements of diversity led to better governance by companies. And we wanted our advice to continue to reflect what was in the best interests of shareholder value. We did have, though, acknowledging that there is additional risk coming out of the Trump administration, we do disclose in our US coverage where we have applied a diversity policy and it's resulting in an against recommendation against the director. And we'll identify that for our clients who can then read through and see what a recommendation would be should we have lifted that, those diversity policies, so they can choose themselves how they want to manage that risk and whether they want to remove that diversity overlay from our advice.
Have you heard back from your clients kind of in response to the changes you've made, the approach you've taken?
I have. On the international side, actually on both sides, universally the client feedback has been positive. There may be a case where a few of the red state clients take a different view, but overwhelmingly it's been positive.
Right, and can I take it as, I guess, indication of your clients' commitment to having a diversified board, promote diversity, given their positive reaction to your approach, which is not to change your policy, but highlight you might want to take a closer look here.
I would agree with that statement. And look, across the markets, we're global firms. Across the markets outside of the US, it's far less of a contentious issue. Though some conversations are happening, my colleagues in Japan field questions from the director community who are a little more outspoken around gender diversity and around the necessity of gender diversity. But we're holding firm in Japan. Conversations are ongoing, and I expect they'll continue to do so as look at these things evolve over time, right? So as is generally healthy.
It has raised some interesting conversations around what true representation looks like. So I think, there's kind of a uniform target that we're moving towards 30% gender diversity on boards across Asia, which sounds like a positive and consistent thing. But if we look at Singapore and Hong Kong, about 70% of females actively work. If we look at South Asian countries like India, Sri Lanka, is closer to 20%. So, what is the extension of these discussions and these challenges? Should diversity be something which is aligned with a global norm or a regional norm? Or should it be something that reflects the talent pipelines and the participation of all diverse groups in the economy and in companies? So, it was an unexpected and powerful fire starter for a lot of conversations in this space with our clients. But I think ultimately it is going to lend to better diversity and representative outcomes across Asia than what was the case before.
Thanks. You've just reminded me of something, Glenn, and that I should clarify. I talked earlier about 30% women on boards in the US. In Taiwan, in Japan, our expectation is there is at least one woman on the board. So we absolutely, you must tailor these policies for local norms. And I just wanted to put that more in context around the conversations we're having in Japan, where we're not pushing a very progressive 30% in Japan. We're after a far more conservative one representation.
Just when you thought proxy advisors weren't in agreement.
There's an exception to the rule. Well, what was I going to say? Oh, yeah, I think, you know, as an investor, we prefer, or we think diversity is beneficial for the boards to have a more effective conversation and is conducive to more effective decision making. And diversity of gender or diversity, ultimately, I think it's about diversity of thoughts, right? Is how we get there. So it's not just about a number on the board, it's not a number on the management team, it's everything, right? How you conduct your recruitment process, how you engage your employees, what is your promotion process like? Especially, I think gender has become kind of the poster child when it comes to gender, comes to diversity because of the common issues women face at workplaces, right? You know, when you go out and have kids, a few children in many cases, then you do face, I think, certain challenges that are not necessarily relevant for a average Joe. Yeah, so I think what we are kind of interested in for our investee companies is you know, what measures they're taking to ensure that women just don't go out there, have children, and then disappear in the workforce altogether, right? Especially when we're, I think, in Asia collectively facing an aging society. You know, how do we mobilize more talents, you know, of both gender to be kind of productive in the workplace? I think is a social challenge for many nations here. So it's very relevant. But approach needs to be more nuanced, definitely not prescriptive, definitely not mechanical, not one size fits all. Okay, great. Coming back to the more, I guess, relevant topic of your proxy voting guideline for Taiwan specifically this year, is there anything you would like to highlight to our audience today?
So good news is the answer is our guidelines are very, very similar as to what they were last year, only changes relating to what's happened in Taiwan regulations. Tenures have shortened, the tenure of independent directors. So I think that might be a little dated now, but essentially no major updates for our guidelines.
ISS?
Yes, broadly the same. No major changes to our updates heading into this this proxy season. One, again, noting the same sort of directional shortage of tenures. That's something we're noting. Two, just the requirement to include explanatory notes if gender diversity is not sort of reaching 30%. The goal by 2027 of 1/3 directors being independent, and sort of with that, and you know, to sort of dovetail that back into the previous sort of discussion as director tenure shortages, again thinking, you know, what diversity of a board and directors looks like. And I think given the keynote we had this morning on AI, the risks around cybersecurity, etc., you know, what expertise is needed on a board in Taiwan at this point of time? Is it geopolitical expertise? Is it trade negotiation expertise? Is it cybersecurity expertise? Kind of how all that dovetails together to make that holistic, compelling case for nominations that we can support.
Thank you, that's helpful. Well, great. If no major changes, I guess we can move on from proxy voting guidelines. Edward Francis, if I can come back to you. In your work with your clients, which is essentially helping them to better engage their investors, are you observing any key changes, trends emerging in Asia or in Taiwan specifically? You know, we touched on AI in earlier sessions. Are you starting to deploy AI in your data analytics work, helping your issuers to identify their shareholder base and all that?
Yeah, Glenn's smiling at me because this is probably going to take the next 1 hour if we decide to go down the path of talking about AI. Let's focus a little bit on AI in the investment market. So within our firm, S&P Global, we're a big data warehouse. We have a huge amount of data. And we are building AI tools that we're deploying to both companies, regulators, as well as to the financial market institutions as well. The reality is AI is here to stay, right? Machine-readable documents have been around for a while. Machines that can read documents have been around for many years. What AI brings to the dimension is context, the ability to read a document and read it in the context of not individual words, but what a sentence might mean or what a paragraph might mean. etc., right? Now, how could that be beneficial or potentially an issue for companies and for investors? I think from the investment community, it potentially means that they can cover a much broader segment of the market than they currently do today, right? There is a limitation on how much a research analyst can look into a market. In Taiwan, they might look at maybe the top 50 companies quite actively. Beyond that, they don't have really, they have the resources or the time to be able to delve further and to analyze it. AI potentially could be an opportunity for them to delve and go down to the next 20, 30, 50 companies, analyze those for potentially what might be new investment opportunities that they may not have looked at in the past before. Where AI potentially can be a little bit risky, and we realized this very quickly as well, is that each large language model out there, every AI tool out there, derives very different results when you ask it the exact same question over and over again across different tools out there, right? So between ChatGPT and then going to DeepSeek and going to another model, it will derive very different results that can come back from it, right? And that can potentially be an issue for companies where if you're disclosing things thinking the whole market's going to accept it as one message, it is going to come back in 10 different messages depending on which AI tool is picking it up and how they're also looking at reading it as well. The other thing that we're very careful when we look at AI is the fact that good news can be amplified, also be amplified at the same time as well. If one AI tool picks something up, reads it incorrectly, and another AI tool reads what the first AI tool read, and then repeats itself across multiple different tools, you might end up in a situation where bad news becomes even worse out there as well. So what does that mean for then issuers and companies like you is you have to understand the tools that are out there. You have to understand AI very, very closely. You have to understand how your disclosures are being used and how they're being read out there in the market as well. It is not, I mean, as of today, we can automatically transcribe an earnings call live, right? It is not impossible that in the next 6 to 12 months, a research report could be written live as a transcript is being produced, and it could be all done on computers without a single human intervention. What we all realize is that humans still need to be there. You still need to check it. You still need to analyze it and make sure that it is correct. And from your perspective as issuers, you also need to make sure that you take that additional step to monitor and to check all those things as well very, very closely. From the issuer perspective, and I think we've heard this as well, AI used by employees becomes a privacy issue, becomes a confidentiality issue, it becomes a governance issue, right? Most companies have now very strict rules around how AI can be deployed or can be used. However, there is still the mobile phone, there is still the home computer, there is still the ability for people to download information from a company server and run it through an AI to get a presentation done. That is not secure, and that is a big issue that's out there in the market today. We might not see it today as yet in terms of investors asking the question, but I think it's definitely something that could come up very soon is, you know, what is your data privacy policies? What are your policies around the use of AI and managing that risk? Because it is quite significant for everyone out here. So from an investor relations perspective, again, be geared up to be ready to answer these questions when it does come to you at some point in time. And it will come because it is there. We see it every single day now, AI being deployed in different ways. So you need to understand what the benefits are, and most of us can see the benefits of formatting a document really quickly, getting analysis done really quickly, but you also need to understand that each AI model has its limitations and it has different ways of reading and producing information as well. So you need to be aware of all those differences as well when you engage with investors and engage with the different tools out there. Glenn, I'm sure you've got a couple of comments you want to add to that.
Yes, no, I was just going to agree with all of that, and in particular, the sentiment to focus on the AI and not the generative AI. And we were recently sort of exposed to a client who had focused on the generative AI, and they were unhappy with our vote recommendations, and nothing says ChatGPT like, I hope this email finds you well, which was how their rebuttal started off. And then sort of going through it, it was clear they didn't have the sandbox around their use of their AI model, and they had introduced market-sensitive, non-public information into their rebuttal, which was then sent to shareholders. So it is an incredibly complex sort of area in terms of the use cases, but in terms of AI itself and the presentation we saw earlier today, AI as a tool for pattern recognition is incredibly important to the future of governance in terms of being able to take a database of board compositions and outcomes and performance and really observe, what kind of board mix works best, delivers consistent returns and protections to shareholder capital, etc. So it's definitely something I think there is enormous potential around kind of the more specific applications of AI rather than the generative applications of AI, which really do require exhaustive sandboxing and privacy concerns around it.
Just want to a point that Edward mentioned earlier on investors coming to you wanting to talk about how you're using AI in your running the company. We're already doing that. We have a few thematic engagements at Fidelity International, obviously, big one on climate, big one on nature, but we also have one on digital ethics, and we've been talking to the big internet companies out there as they start building like 1 million data centers and start to develop their algorithm to try to get a sense of how they're thinking about the governance of AI, essentially. Now, admittedly, we are no expert on this, so most of our conversations really is to kind of educate ourselves, but also the act of talking to our investee companies on these issues, I think sends a signal to them, hopefully, that we care about those, right? Even if it's hard to understand, it's complex, but we also understand the implication of AI being used in a abusive way. So it's an important issue, even if we're not an expert on it. We want to at least keep a conversation going with them, getting assurance that they are aware of those issues and they're working on those issues. But right now, the engagement on those topics are limited to the big internet companies out there. But I think as AI becomes more pervasive in our work, in our economic activities, then it will be a relevant topic for most issuers at some point. Francis, anything you want to add in terms of how your clients engage with their investors?
Yeah, I really appreciate Edward's sharing on the AI practice that you have involved in your business practices. And I think there's a few observations I want to share with in terms of IR practices in Taiwan, and specifically in Taiwan. And throughout the years that I worked at Proxy Advisors, and I just witnessed like how the AI practice has been evolving here in Taiwan. I remember when I first started about 6 years ago, when I go onto MOF, the platform, when I downloaded companies' annual reports, it's actually often cases it's not in PDF cases, and we have to convert that into PDF, and then the website is a bit difficult to navigate. But like recently, I log on to MOF again. It has this modern implication, and it looks. And now all the annual reports and information disclosure here in Taiwan disclosed in bilingual. I think, and throughout my encounters with IR associates in Taiwan, they are always so eager to learn about what's happening in the international investor community and what's happening with the proxy advisors' voting policies. And that's what I really appreciate here in Taiwan.
I know.
Quickly, you want to talk about the AI piece. Just one last one. It's
I shouldn't start the topic of AI.
Here's a practical example, right? So I, as a manager, have to manage a bunch of people, and at the end of each year, I have to do a performance review for each and every one of them. Now, in the past, it used to be 1 paragraph per question would come back. Now, it comes back with about 5 paragraphs with bold print, underlined, capitalized language that I've never seen before, coming from an employee, telling me about all the wonderful things that they've done. They clearly have used an AI tool to do that. Now, what's concerning as well is they are saying, like, I'm putting in my sales numbers, for example, because this is a great thing. I've done 105% of my number against a quarter of X number or whatever else. That's at a micro level for one individual. Now, imagine companies, if they're not careful, putting in a potential earnings call, throw a transcript through and say, write me a transcript for an earnings for certain companies out there. We think it's funny, but if people can do this for their performance reviews, imagine what they can do with some financials that are non-public information going into potentially AI tools that are not secure today as well. It's a major issue, right? And so that's why, for us, it's extremely important to train our people and to make sure that they understand what it is they can or cannot do with these tools, because even the most innocent things of writing a performance review aggregated for an entire company of 500 people writing the same thing through the same tool can derive certain things that are not going to be good for the company in the overall sense.
I agree. I think a major struggle we have these days is really this misinformation, and AI could definitely exacerbate that problem. And I don't really think we have already kind of countermeasure to that. So something for all of us to kind of think about. I got a alarm clock at the back telling me I've got 4 minutes left. So I think we should open it up to the floor to see if there are any questions. I have to warn you, I do know a few people in the room, so if I don't get any volunteers, I might call on people to ask questions.
现在是开放现场提问时间，欢迎各位来宾可以踊跃的举手发问。我们的工作人员会把麦克风递过去。有任何问题吗？
Okay, should I call on people then? I'm looking at Linda.
好，这边有一个问题。
Well, thank you, Flora.
You're welcome.
This is Linda for Taishin Financial Holding, and thank you for the panelists. I have to say that since my company is also named by Frances, and in one of her cases, I actually would like to go back to Flora's comment in the very beginning of this panel, is that in Taiwan market, we do see some local contested, proxy contested, but not really the shareholder activism. So here that as an investor relation, our role is mostly that we do not really care about the definition of whether this is a truly shareholder activism or this is a local contested proxy fight. And in the end, it is about where my company is doing. And is there any room that today we are in the situation that we have this contest? Is there anything that we are missing that probably that caused the confusion or caused the trouble, today's trouble? So we do need to do some of this kind of the gap analysis. And so also my question, because I actually appreciate the discussion, especially the last part, is about the misinformation, because that's also, I personally think that's one of the biggest challenge that we are facing today, because we have so many information, and some are right, some are wrong, but we have a very short period of time for the communicating, no matter it's with ISS, Glasswitz, or with our shareholder, because in the end, that especially in Taiwan, lots of the listed company, they are not major cap, but our investor has to cast so many votes in short period of time, whether they have sufficient time or resources to analyze our case. So my question is, since that today and all our panelists here are sitting on stage, you pay attention and you already spend your time in Taiwan market. So that given this short period of time and then your knowledge on this local contest or the shareholder activism, I actually don't really like the word shareholder activism here in Taiwan, because today I haven't found any cases here really meet the global standard of shareholder activism. So that with so many local contexts in this contested election, how do you help yourself, or how do you make sure your team have enough knowledge or enough the background information to know the market and to help the investor that really make the right decision in terms of voting? Not the right, but knowledgeable information decision.
Thank you, Linda. I think that's a very, very relevant question. I'm cognizant that none of us are based in Taiwan, actually. So what do you do to familiarize yourself with the local context? Sometimes it gets really messy.
I'll have a go. And there's an array of matters we see. We've seen contested elections where a dissident is placed up for election, and there is no reason as to why or what that dissident is campaigning for. There is nothing that we're able to do to consider that. So essentially, in the absence of rationale, we're going to support the incumbents and oppose the dissident. Where it spills out into the media, we will be reviewing the media articles. We'll be using things, there may be prior litigation that has gone one way or the other, tarnishing an individual's reputation. That may be a reason for us to have concern with that individual's fitness on the board. So it might be the case that we would support a dissident to replace such an individual. In a sense, we are relying on public information, and in an absence of public information, chances are that's going to be beneficial to the incumbents.
Yes, I mean, I would just add to that, for these specific local contests, I think, just maintain credibility and clarity for the incumbent, show performance, responsiveness, and strategy clarity. And I think that shifts the onus then to the dissident to have to present qualified narratives and constructive, well-supported alternatives for it to be considered.
I think the activists don't like the word activists either. The term they like to use is highly engaged investors, I think is the terminology that's correctly used these days. As you all know, from engagement with investors out there, there are the proxy advisors that will give the baseline reports out there that we expect institutional investors will take a look at and reply. But the reality is the people casting the votes are going to be the institutional investors. The engagement that you need to have ultimately still needs to be with that investor. The longer you have that relationship with that investor, the deeper you have that relationship with the investor, the easier it is going to be to communicate and for them to understand the culture and the people that are within the firm and what it is that you're trying to do as well. I always remember a call that we had with an investor in one of the cases that we worked on. This was in China. And the investor came on the call and said, look, this call will only take 5 minutes, by the way. And the company starts to panic going, okay, oh dear, this is going to be bad. And the investor said, actually, you know what? I wanted to have this call because I wanted to say thank you to you as the management team. Over the years, we've been invested in you. You've always engaged with us on a regular basis. You've always been very transparent, very open to us. And so we will support you in your resolution and what you're trying to do to privatize this company. And we'll do it because we have that deep relationship with you. And the only reason we wanted to have this call is to say that we are quite that we will no longer have the ability to engage with you going forward because you're going to privatize as a company. That is a profound statement by an investor that says, we really trust you, we know, and we've built a relationship over many years that we want to continue this, but it's a pity that we can't do it. So for all of you out here, whilst there are reports that will be written, there will be things that happen around the world, etc., that relationship that you have and you build with investors will make a huge difference when you need to pick up the phone, speak to them, engage with them, because they will then understand you and your company a lot deeper through all the years of engagement that you have with them.
Francis, anything to
add? For a case like local proxy contests, I think now from a Sodali's perspective, we will be on the front lines with companies supporting in a situation like contested elections, help our companies to establish relationship with investors and proxy advisors.
Well, I'm going to give a response of my own, kind of half jokingly. I think watch some of the local drama helps, like the 乡土剧, because a lot of the context really is a family kind of matter. So, having even just a feel of how family businesses work in Taiwan actually give you, I think, a bit of a better connection to understanding some of the higher profile proxy contacts in Taiwan. Yeah. So with that, I think we're gonna wrap it up. Close the panel. Let's please, thank our panelists for their insights and very open sharing. And thank you very much for your time as well.
Thank you very much to our moderator and for our panelists. Please remain on stage as we will now take a group photo.